Hey guys, it's the 19th of May, it's Tuesday, and I want to go over a few things with your lab manual with you. And the last time I sent you something that dealt with anatomy, I started by making a phrase that I came down out of the trees. The reason I say that is because this time of the year I'm climbing trees to count eggs in Cooper's hawk nest. That's what I meant by that. At any rate, so I want to make a few things clear about your lab manual. Pages 7, 8, 9, and 10, 13, 14, and 15 have no material that per se will show up on the lab exam. These pages, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 14, 15. I'm going to allude to some of the material therein, but per se the material on there I'm not going to test you on a lab exam, just so you know. So, what I want to do briefly today or this evening, I want to cover a feature of the anatomy that's novel. And I try to emphasize novelty of bird biology and bird anatomy. So that's what I'm going to do this evening. This is an exposed body cavity of a psittaciform. It's a budgie, a parrot. And they've removed, if you will, the lower ventral muscle mass and exposed some of the organs. And the thing I want to point out is, again, I'm not holding you responsible for identifying any of these organs, but I do want to point out something contextually that pertains to the novel respiratory system, which is why I'm going to post this video. Unlike mammals like you and I, the chest cavity is not separated from the rest of the body in a bird. There is no diaphragm. There is no muscle, which of course when it does contract, it forms a vacuum and it allows oxygen to come in. So there's no diaphragm. Reason? Get rid of the mass. They still have to create a vacuum to bring in air for the lungs. And you don't see any lungs right here. Yikes, how do they breathe? The lungs, our lungs, inflate and deflate as we take in air and we expel air. And if we were to expose our chest cavity, you would see the lungs clearly if we had exposed the lower and ventral portion of the body. But in a bird, they're packed up toward the back in the rib cage. So you don't see them here, and I'm going to show you another image from your lab manual that displays them. But no diaphragm. The diaphragm's a muscle and it contracts, creates a vacuum. So how is a vacuum created in a bird's body to allow it to breathe? And it has a high need for oxygen, as some of the lecture material indicates that you should have read by now. And that is this. The muscles associated with the rib cage and the sternum rhythmically, if you will, distend. They lower at a rhythmic basis, and that creates a vacuum. And that's how they're breathing. You almost never can see that in a healthy bird. You can almost never see the chest moving. But that's how they create the vacuum. They use other muscles to do so. Again, this is another page of the lab manual that per se, I'm not going to expect you to tell me organs, for instance, on an exam, but I want to show you contextually. Here are the lungs, and they are packed up against action on either side of the backbone and right up against the ribs. They are very, very difficult to expose compared to, for instance, for dissection in a mammal. They never deflate. They cannot deflate, given, if you will, the high demands of respiratory metabolic activity that a bird demands. So by never deflating, they're ready to go all the time. This figure is not in your lab manual. There's a figure analogous to a certain extent in Gill, the 3rd edition, of course, your textbook. This is a picture that depicts the respiratory system that's very novel in birds. And one of the most key novel facets of it, besides the fact that the lungs do not deflate, they're always ready to accept oxygen or get rid of CO2, is the fact that the lungs are actually conjunct. They are interlaced with a labyrinth of connective organs that are called air sacs. These are novel features in a bird, and they're displayed here for us. So most posteriorly are the abdominal air sacs. In most birds there's 2. There are 2 posterior thoracic air sacs. There are 2 anterior thoracic air sacs. There's one here and there's one over here. There are two cervical air sacs. Cervical because they align themselves or are parallel to the cervical vertebrae. So these are the cervical air sacs. And then the last one, which can either be paired or often singular, and often it's singular, is the interclavicular. So associated with the furcula, with the wishbone. And inter meaning between the clavicles, which of course are fused in a bird, which we discussed in a previous YouTube, I guess. So here's the interclavicular air sac. So here you have the lungs, and then you have these air sacs that are contiguous with the bird. Air sacs have one premier function. They have multiple functions, but the big one is this. They allow for a unidirectional flow of air. The synergy of having these anatomical organs associated with lungs that don't deflate allow a bird to more readily, more efficiently extract oxygen. And they do so with not a simple one inhalation and one exhalation. They do so with essentially two inhalations and two exhalations. So to get one single volume of air in and out, if you will, and exchange oxygen for CO2, there are one inhalation, they go, exhalation, same volume is still in the air, still in the body, and then the second exhalation is when that original volume leaves. And basically, the air, when it is inhaled, bypasses the lung and goes posteriorly. On the first exhalation, the air moves into the lungs, and then the oxygen is taken up. With the second inhalation, which is going to create pressure when more air comes in, then this now volume filled with CO2 goes up to the anterior regions like the interclavicular air sacs and the cervical air sacs. And then with the second exhalation, then that original volume goes out. So there's actually two inhalations, two exhalations. These air sacs are just several cells thick. They're very thin, like mesentery. So if you dissect a bird, you cut it open, and if you think you'd be able to expect to see the air sacs, well, you'd be a bit naive because they deflate so readily. Okay, now as I just stated to you guys, it is true that the premier function of the air sacs is for unidirectional flow of air through the lungs, greater efficiency of exchanges of gases. But air sacs are co-opted or exapted, secondarily adapted for other functions. Because they are so voluminous and they're moist, they enhance the ability for evaporative water loss. They also create a buoyancy construct, if you will, to the flight of the bird through air. So there's dissipation of heat. If you've got to run high body temperatures, which birds do, that's a huge advantage. They also can be used in this following manner. These are cervical air sacs that are exposed. They are externally shown here, and they are colored. These ones are thicker than usual, and a prairie chicken uses them as a secondary sexual characteristics for display in these males. So here's another example. Some of the lecture modules indicate where you can co-opt or secondarily have something adaptive for a different function. And one other thing that I want to make sure that you're aware of. In male birds, there is no external gonadal placement. There are no testes located outside a body. That wouldn't function well for a variety of reasons. But I want to hearken you back to a very important thing about birds. They run high body temperatures. And spermatogenesis is a liability under, contextually now, under high body temperatures, because the higher the body temperatures, enzymes, proteinaceous materials, denature. So spermatogenesis, and the creation, if you will, the development of sperm, which is a proteinaceous entity, would seem to be a default liability big time by having testes occur inside a bird's body, which is where they occur in a male. Howsomever, testes lie right next to the most posterior and relatively large paired air sacs known as the abdominal air sacs. So what the bird does with that first inhalation, a male bird, they bring in relatively cool air compared to the body temperatures. That's a very good generalization. And that cool air goes right to the abdominal air sacs, as earlier mentioned. And with the testes being right next to those thin tissued organs, those air sacs, basically there's a cooling dynamic set up. That cooling air that was just inhaled tends to provide for a setup metabolically for the sperm to be produced in a relatively zone of cooler air, and do the spermatogenesis at night, in the evening, when temperatures are cooler. So that's another very important adaptive construct associated with secondary function, if you will, of air sacs, in this particular instance, with male birds. Guys, just a footnote here of an entity in one of the labs that I kind of borrowed permanently from an anatomy lab, and I keep it here in the vertebrate lab now. This is the respiratory apparatus of, I suspect, a relatively large pigeon. And some innovative person, undoubtedly a pointer, injected the bird with this red latex and stripped away all the other tissue. And this is the dorsal view of the respiratory tract, and this is a ventral view, and a lot of the other organs like liver and heart would be in here. So this is the, and the backbone would go right up through here. This is the bird's left lung, and you can see how vascularized it is. This is a bird's right lung. And this, just so you can see it now, is the trachea. This is the windpipe that is cartilaginously ringed, so it doesn't deflate, of course. And it always comes off the bird's left side. Now, this is the bird's left side, this is the bird's right side, always on the left side of the neck. And just to show you, these are cervical air sacs. Yep, they look different in different kinds of birds. They look like, oh, not completely developed antlers, like on an antelope of some sort, let's say. So those are the cervical sacs, they're paired. Here are interclavicular sacs right here, and they arch right up over these two lungs. This is an anterior thoracic air sac, and it goes right up inside the lung here underneath, and they have to be paired. So here's another anterior thoracic air sac. And then a posterior thoracic air sac, which looks kind of like a kidney bean. You can see where it's attached right to the lung. As I told you, it's connected with such. It has to be paired. So if you go over here, here's another posterior thoracic air sac. Okay. And then these, and you can see the connection sites, these are the abdominal air sacs. So there's two abdominals, here and here, posterior thoracic, kind of kidney bean shaped, then anterior thoracic, interclavicular, which actually is connected here underneath, and then these two cervicals, left lung, right lung, and the trachea, always on the bird's left side. It's very difficult for someone to get the apparatus preserved in such a manner, so I thought I'd share this with you. One more cast from me about the respiratory system. This is page 16 in your lab manual, and this is a page I do want you to take a look at. The underlined portions of this are the things that I'm holding you responsible for, and I really just covered them. The trachea, which is the windpipe, which would be on the bird's left side. Let's assume this is a dorsal view. The cervical sacs, the interclavicular sacs, anterior thoracic, the lungs, of course, the posterior thoracic air sacs, and then the abdominal sacs. And again, these things are paired. They're moved out apart from each other so you can see them, but I encourage you to underline those things. The other entities that are indicated here are nothing that you would ever see on an exam or me holding you responsible for. Postscript to anatomy, etc., the things that I've already put on video and that are on your lab manual sheets. This, of course, is a swan, and we covered some topographical features, external anatomy. I wanted to make a point about, related, if you will, to also things on their skin and trying to stay lightweight. So just two things. Bird skin is basically aglandular. There aren't very many glands in it because they would weigh. We have sebaceous glands, for instance, which allow us to dissipate heat by moving moisture outside of our body and then it drying, which is going to be dissipating of heat dynamic. Birds, if they were to do such a construct, they would be weighted down with the extra weight of the glands in the skin, and it also would muck up their feathers. And in keeping their feathers very good, there is one important gland which is located right at the junction, if you will, of where just above where the tail feathers conjunct with the butt. And there's a preen gland, there's a little wax gland there, and it's like a little teat. And it exudes a sebaceous, waxy, hydrophobic material, okay? And the bird, because of its flexible head and neck, which we talked about earlier, can reach around and squeeze that with its bill and get some of the oil on the bill, the tomie of the bill, and then they wipe it across all of the feathers and basically waterproof themselves. Now, precipitation is slightly acidic, so of course water is eventually going to degrade the covering, the raincoat application, if you will, of maintaining, if you will, a relatively dry plumage. So they have to continuously, throughout, on a daily basis, preen themselves and use wax from their wax gland or their uropygial gland. They do so with their bill, so that means they can't get the top of the head oiled. Wrong. The head is so flexible, remember there's one occipital condyle, so they reach back here and they grab some oil, excess, gob it up kind of, and they wipe the excess on the shoulder, they bring the head around, they flip the head upside down, and they rub the oil right up on top, and so they are like wearing a plastic bag all the way along of their body. Last thing on this vignette. This word pneumatization refers to construct of creating a lighter weight in the overall body mass of a bird. Bones are mineralized protein. The more minerals you have in that protein, the heavier is the mass of the bone. So if you're a flying entity and you want to be lightweight, that creates a default problem. So one of the ways that birds get around that context is this. They pneumaticize, or if you will, functionally speaking, they render many bones, not all of them, hollow or hollow them out. For instance, this is a mallard wing, and this is a humerus bone right here I'm touching, and you'll notice the cavernous opening, and that creates a lightweight construct to such. Now, the moment you create a hollowness, then the trade-off is it might not be as structurally strong. So what some birds do is when they render a bone hollow, they put struts in it to create some secondary strength or integrity for the, if you will, viability of a stronger bone. This is a humerus bone of a Canada goose, and if you look closely, you can see some of the struts, if you will, those very thin, fibrous-looking bony struts, which is, again, striking a bit of a trade-off, if you will, on a favorable basis. And the last time I spoke to you, I believe the last time, I made a point about how lightweight this bill is on this toucan. True it is. One of the reasons it's so lightweight is because the bones in here are very strongly pneumaticized. You can see some of the pneumatization if you look closely in here at the base, for instance, of the maxilla, and you see all those holes in there. Yes, it is true some of those holes accommodate vessels and neural constructs, if you will, vessels, but those also, some of that hollowness helps render the endoskeletal apparatus lighter weight.